All right, and welcome to our online lecture on federalism. This is chapter 3 in your textbook, as you can see there. And you should know by now, because of the notes that we took, what federalism is. Federalism is the division of power between the national government and the state government. Technically, it's the division of power between any two levels of government, but here in the United States, which is what we're worried about, it's the division of power between the national government and the state governments. You can also have a unitary government. That's where there's only one level of government. Most countries in the world, by the way, about 175, 180 of the 190 nations on the planet have a federal system, have a unitary system, Unitary by far the most common. Only 11 countries in the world have a federal system, but those would include the United States, Canada, and Mexico, so us and all our neighbors. There's also a confederation, which we talked about a little bit. In a confederation, the smaller levels of government, I should say, have the power. The Confederacy, of course, where the states were more powerful than the federal government. The Articles of Confederation government are an example. And here they, of course, use the United Nations as an example of a confederation. Whoops. Sorry. And another term to know here is intergovernmental relations. And that means, how do the two levels of government interact? How does the national government interact with the state government? There's also local governments, of course, and how do they all interact? We're going to be talking about that a lot as this chapter goes on. So here's a table showing you the differences in these three forms of government. You can pause this and read the table if you want, but I'm going to move on. Why is federalism important? Well, it decentralizes our politics. So if we had a central system, let's say England, in England all the politics is occurring in London, and so if you lived in, say, Scotland or something, this is a bit of an issue because you're far away from the center of power and you're far away from politicians who get to make decisions about your daily life. But here in the United States, the truth is, as much as we talk about the federal government, most of the decisions that affect our lives happen on the local and state level. And so Texas, or if I'm here in Texas, it's, I can go and try to communicate, or I can try to work through change I want or whatever it is through my state official, through my state representative or my state senator, for example. And that's true, of course, of all 50 states. And so not all the power rests in Washington, D.C. A lot of it rests here with us locally. This also gives us more opportunities to participate. Think about all the different opportunities you could serve in the government. You could not only be from the president and the Senate and the House and the federal judiciary, but you also have the governor, you have state representatives, state legislatures, you have city councils, you have school board members, the sheriff is an elected official, local judges. Lots and lots of opportunities for us to get directly involved. It also decentralizes our policies. Every state gets to make its own policies. One of the terms we use here a lot is the laboratory of democracy. And that means that all these different states try things, and if they work out well, other states copy it, and if they don't, they don't. For example, the current healthcare system is based on a model that Mitt Romney implemented in the state of Massachusetts, and it was very popular there, and it seemed to have a good success, politics aside. And so now it's become adopted on the national level. Massachusetts, in that case, served as a laboratory for the rest of the country. It also means that different states can take different approaches based on what the citizens of their state wants. It says here states regulate drinking ages. It's funny, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And marriage, which is another tricky one, but of course states all over the country are defining marriage differently now. Speed limits is a good one. I know that I drive to New Mexico many times a year. And in Texas right now, I think you can have speed limits as high as 80 miles an hour. But in New Mexico, you can only go up to 70. And so I'll be on a highway, and it'll be 80 in Texas. And then when I cross the state line, I have to drop down to 70. We let each state make those decisions based on what they want. For a while there, in some of those big empty states up there like Wyoming and Montana, they had no speed limits whatsoever, which is not something that would be acceptable in, say, New York State. So this leads to lots of different approaches to policy based on what an individual state and its citizens might want. And so that's one of the advantages of federalism. It gives us a tremendous amount of flexibility. Our country occupies an enormous amount of physical space and an incredibly diverse population. And what people want in Texas is probably different than what people want in Oregon or New York State or Wisconsin. And if we had one government that had to have one-size-fits-all policies for all 300 million of us and for this enormous landmass, that probably wouldn't work. And so federalism creates a lot of flexibility and kind of bendiness in how we approach policy across the United States. Now, federalism is in the Constitution, of course. We do establish the order of power with the Supremacy Clause. Article 6 of the Constitution says that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, followed by laws of Congress and treaties. And so if there is a conflict between what a state does and the Constitution, or a federal law or an international treaty, and I'll give you examples of all of those later, then the federal level overrides the state level. For example, there's a case, Holland, a Supreme Court case from the 1920s or 30s, where a state is refusing to protect a bird that the federal government is starting to see as an endangered species. And it's Holland v. Missouri. Missouri's a state. And so the United States feels they don't have the power to force Missouri to protect this bird. So they sign a treaty with Canada saying that we'll protect the bird. So the treaty then overrides the state law. It's a very clever way of kind of working around a federalism issue where the federal government got to have their way over the state. But if a power is given to the states, it cannot be taken away by the federal government. There's lots of examples of this. Roads, with the exception of interstate highways, education systems or school systems, almost all criminal prosecutions and imprisonments are handled at the state level. And the federal government can't just insert themselves into those functions of government. They do, but they have to do it in a sneaky way. We'll get to that in a little bit. So here you can, again, pause this and read this. These are different powers granted to the federal government by the Constitution, and then powers explicitly denied the federal government by the Constitution. So you'll see, if you check this chart out, and I encourage you to do that, the 10th Amendment is where this comes out of. The 10th Amendment says that all powers not given to the federal government are reserved for the states. And we call this the Reserved Powers Clause. So we're talking in class, or if you're writing an answer to an essay question, remember that phrase, the Reserved Powers Clause. So why can't the federal government come in and tell me what to teach in my classroom, whereas the state government can? Because of the Reserved Powers Clause, because running the educational system is considered to be a state power.